find out how producers there hope to help out Europe and cash in on the renaissance in fossil fuels.
It's a race against time. In the midst of a worldwide energy crisis, the question is how the Western world can secure its energy supply. For more than half a century, North Dakota's energy industry has been a major contributor to the US economy. The state is the second leading producer of oil in the US, just after Texas. It pumps over 1 million barrels a day, even more than Venezuela.
Tioga is mainly an oil production area. If oil was gone, it'd be just a farming community, just like the rest of most small areas in North Dakota. So it's very vital for the identity right now.
But North Dakota is not just a major source of non-renewable energy. To fight climate change, money has also been invested in green energy, like wind turbines over the last several years. Paul Jensen is an advocate for renewable energy.
As you can probably feel today, we have a very high wind capacity factor here in this state. The wind blows continuously. We call it the Saudi Arabia of wind. More energy independence is better for us. That will also make more fixed prices, and competitiveness will be improved.
Here we see the two worlds collide. On the one side, we see a symbol of the old fossil fuel world, a substation of a gas pipeline. On the other side, we see hundreds of wind turbines representing a world of renewable energy. In Bismarck, the state capital, Pam Trellig has a different take. She works for a labor union that represents oil and pipeline workers.
Right now, with the war going on in the Ukraine, we're actually seeing an uptick on a push toward fossil fuel energy, not the green power, because it's so available and it's readily produced here in the state of North Dakota. There is a greater voice for fossil fuels, and the United States can produce what we need plus export more.
As the world scrambles to find more sources of energy, fossil fuels here at least seem to have the edge.
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin is due to hold talks with central bank and Gazprom officials today about how Moscow's demand for gas payments in rubles is to be implemented. But Putin has told German Chancellor Olaf Scholz payment could still be made in euros or dollars and then be converted into rubles by Gazprom's own bank. Berlin has asked for written clarification. Uncertainty over the process has prompted Germany and other European countries to prepare for possible disruptions to gas deliveries.
Russian gas is still flowing to Germany, but the government wants to be prepared in case the taps are suddenly switched off. It triggered an early warning status for gas supplies. It's the first of 3 steps in a gas emergency plan for Germany. Economy Minister Robert Habeck announced that a crisis team will now closely monitor supplies so that further steps can be taken if necessary.
Supplies are secure, all contracts are being fulfilled, and gas and oil are arriving in Germany as planned. So this is a preventive or precautionary step.
There is concern that Russia could cut gas deliveries to Europe unless they are paid for in rubles, which Germany and other G7 countries refuse to do. But Germany is heavily dependent on Russian gas, importing up to 55% of its total supply from there. Habeck is also calling on everyone in Germany to reduce their own consumption.
Every kilowatt hour of energy saved helps, and that's why I would like to combine the triggering of this early warning for gas supplies with the appeal for companies and private consumers to help. You're helping Germany, you're helping Ukraine when you reduce your use of gas or energy in general.
Germany's industry would be disrupted if the gas flow were to stop. Lawmakers are working on a plan to support the sector.
some industries, you cannot just turn it off and on, then the whole production line is broken. So it's really important that we keep the things running, and therefore we are working really hard in the background on some measures that will help small, medium, but also all the large companies in Germany through these rough and tough times.
So far, Germany's gas supplies are not directly under threat. But the country wants to set up all possible precautions if indeed supplies were suddenly cut.
Well, for more on the gas crisis, I'm now joined by Professor Andreas Goltau from the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies. He's in Brügge right now. Professor, what would it mean for Germany and Europe if Russian gas deliveries were stopped?
Well, thanks for having me. Russian gas makes up for a large part of the gas that we consume. It's about a third. So 150 billion cubic meters a year for all of Europe, 55% of German imports. The German economy would take a significant hit because it is a feedstock that is used in industry in various parts, including in the automotive industry, which is important for Germany. The question really is whether we're going to get there. Things have eased a little bit after the Russians backpedaled yesterday on the ruble payments, but it certainly reminds us that we need to get prepared and to be a lot more resilient going forward.
Talking about preparation, yesterday Germany's Minister Habeck has announced the triggering of an early warning for gas supplies. How close are we to an actual gas shortage in Germany that every citizen will be able to feel?
Well, I guess it's important to see that this is a process. We're at the first stage of a scale of escalation. So the early warning system essentially says we monitor what's going on. We're not at a point in time where gas cutoffs are really taking place, because that would mean the state takes over and state authorities, gas regulators, essentially start distributing what's there. This is a situation that at the moment is not pending. And again, given yesterday's, signals coming out of Moscow, we might have pushed that further down the road a little bit. But certainly it is worrying. It is something we need to get prepared for.
Now, Germany, for example, has its own gas reserves. Couldn't Germany just ramp up production, open up their own taps?
Well, Germany doesn't produce very much. It's actually very little. Germany is not a gas-producing country. It's not an oil-producing country. It did have coal, but the hard coal production was shut down. So,
can I just interrupt you there? But I think there's significant reserves in the north of Germany, gas reserves.
Well, there are reserves, but you need to. Well, first of all, you got to develop those fields, and that's not something you do overnight. So, if at all, if it comes through, it actually means that in a couple of years, we might see actually some German production coming along. But this will not be enough to replace 55% of overall consumption. For this, a lot of other measures need to be taken, including additional LNG, liquefied natural gas, possibly more piped gas from other places, and particularly on the demand side, a lot of savings and fuel switch.
But could Germany sort of turn up the tap as far as it goes, and wouldn't it at least help?
Well, the question is, whom would it help? And essentially, the big question here is, how do you balance a foreign policy imperative, which is to find a way of making Russia change course, and an energy embargo would certainly be an effective way of doing that. How do you balance that with the imperative of keeping the economy running and make sure households are kept warm? Now, the latter is not such a problem, but still the question is, how much of a hit can the economy and the voter accept in the short run? And that's precisely the decision policymakers need to take at the moment.
Dr. Andreas Goltau from the Institute of Advanced Sustainability Studies, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're watching DW News. Still to come, Ukraine is at the top of the agenda as German Chancellor Olaf Scholz meets his Austrian counterpart Karl Nehammer. We're awaiting their press conference shortly. We're seeing live pictures here of the venue and we'll bring it to you live when it happens. But first, US astronaut Mark van der Hey has now landed in the record books after spending more time in space than any other American before him. And after nearly a year on the International Space Station, he hitched a ride in a Russian spacecraft for his return trip to Earth. Despite tensions between the US and Russia over the war in Ukraine, van der Hey and his Russian colleagues are sending a message of unity.
Touchdown confirmed at 6:28 a.m. Central Time.
A return to Earth after a record-breaking trip for Mark van der Hey. He had been on the ISS for 355 days, an American record, after his stay was extended last year. He travelled back to Earth with two Russian colleagues in a Russian-made Soyuz capsule. There had been doubts regarding the return of the American after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But the outgoing Russian commander was clear. The conflict stays on Earth.
People have problem on Earth, on orbit. We are like, we are one crew, and I think ISS is like symbol of the friendship and cooperations and like symbol of future of exploration of space.
After travelling 150 million miles and orbiting the planet almost 6,000 times, these, their final moments in space, before a return to the realities of planet Earth.
Athletes of Ukraine's junior national swimming team have escaped the country and are currently training in Hungary. That's all because of a friendship that started back in the 1980 Olympics in Moscow between two competitors. DW has this exclusive report from Hungary.
Kamila Isayeva and Oleksandra Zeltyakov consider themselves lucky. They escaped the hell in their homeland to pursue the sport they love. The two Ukrainian national junior team champions are in Hungary, training at one of the country's top facilities, the Sport Usoda, or Sports Aquatic Center in Debrecen, the second largest city in the country. The 16-year-olds are just two of the 37 junior national team swimmers who've made it to Hungary. Both escaped from the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, first traveling to Poland. For Kamila, the trip through Ukraine was high anxiety.
It was very scary because you understand that Russians, they just shoot at whole families, they shoot at cars, they don't care if there's kids in here.
And they're safe now thanks to a friendship that began at the 1980 Olympics in Moscow. Back then, Sándor Vlodar was a top-rated Hungarian swimmer. And Ukrainian Sergei Fezenko was also a world-class competitor who swam for the Soviet Union. Both also ended up winning gold medals at the Games and also struck up a close friendship. Vlodar is now the president of the Hungarian Swimming Association, while Fezenko is a delegate of the Ukrainian Swim Federation. So when the fighting broke out in Ukraine, Fezenko asked Vlodar a big favor. He wrote him on WhatsApp, asking the Hungarian Swimming Association to take in and financially support Ukraine's elite junior swimmers and provide top training. Vlodar agreed.
It wasn't a difficult decision. It only took a few moments. There was no question as to whether we would help them or not. We didn't analyze what problems there might be, neither then nor now.
The swimmers are now safe, but the painful reality is that they are still very torn.
I understand that I'm here, I'm swimming, I'm safe, I have a food to eat, I have a roof over my head, and I understand that I don't have to feel guilty, but sometimes this feeling comes to me, and I try everything I can to help Ukraine. I donate money for our soldiers, I help with volunteering, translating, anything I can do online.
Once when I was speaking with my family, two rockets sailed over the house and hit the airport. They blew it up, and now we don't have an airport.
Vlodar knows that all is not well for the swimmers, but at least they're safe.
It was quite clear that you could see horror, fatigue and insecurity in their eyes. But after a few days, they saw that they had gotten to a good place.
And all thanks to
And we have to leave that report because German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his colleague from Austria are giving their press conference now. Let's listen.
Aggression against Ukraine and the dreadful consequences this has for Europe and the world. Together, we request President Putin to agree to a cessation and to have peace negotiations starting. Mr. Nehammer and I also agree that in Europe we have to help quickly and unbureaucratically, help both to Ukraine and the neighbouring countries most affected. It's a good thing, and it's important that last week at the European Council meeting in Brussels, European countries again made clear they are willing to accept refugees, and they also are willing to provide further support to Ukraine and the neighbouring countries. In particular, I would like to mention the Republic of Moldova, where compared to the number of inhabitants, they have received the most refugees. To give you an idea of the ratio involved, we're talking about approximately 350,000 refugees when the country has 3.5 million inhabitants. That is 10%. If we were to translate that to Germany, it would be more than 8 million, and that is a huge number. Jointly with Romania and France, Germany will next week hold a support conference for Moldova. By doing so, we would like to provide direct and lasting support for the Republic of Moldova. I would also like to thank my Austrian colleague because his country has already received the 2,000 refugees from Moldova. Germany is going to take in 2,500 refugees. These are important elements of a pan-European solution, and that very solution is what we need in this important issue. Apart from that, concrete support for Ukraine is going to be further strengthened, and we will resolutely implement our sanctions. The sanctions we all agreed on are extremely far-reaching, and they are having an effect. It remains important to push for an effective implementation, and all loopholes that we find must be closed in order to keep up the pressure on the Russian president. At the same time, we are working extremely hard to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels from Russia. Chancellor Nehammer and I both agree that the energy turnaround is more than an important contribution to climate change. That goes without saying, but it is also the best way forward to achieve energy independence. It is necessary for us to make sure that we strengthen and support the regions in our neighbourhood. That, and I would like to say this as a last point, implies a clear perspective for joining the EU eventually for the countries of the Western Balkans. It is therefore important that we start opening negotiations as soon as possible with Macedonia, Northern Macedonia and Albania. Any further delay makes countries vulnerable, open to the influence of third parties. But in order to do this, within the European Union, we need to make further progress with reform so we are able to take in more countries. So that was quite a lot, and it was only a small segment of what we've discussed, but it was an expression of good cooperation, which after all will continue. It is not limited to just today. Thank you. Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, a big thank you, Chancellor, for your hospitality. I'm very glad that despite the very intense time we are all living through, we did have an opportunity to meet here in Germany, have an exchange of views, and also to align our joint policy, joint in the truest sense of the word. As the Chancellor of Austria, I'm very glad to have a strong partner at my side with a clear pro-European orientation, who also makes clear how important it is that within the European Union we shoulder the huge responsibilities and challenges of our time together. Two of the concrete issues we discussed have already been mentioned by the Chancellor: climate change and what we can do. The question of being independent of fossil fuels is a must at this time. The war against Ukraine, the policy of the Russian Federation has made clear that we are on the right track, but we can only benefit from cooperation when we really want to accelerate that way into the future. Mr. Olaf Scholz, as part of the heads of government of the European Union, has been very strongly advocating this transformation. That is very much also in the interests of Austria, and I would like to emphatically thank you for this cooperation, because we want to make sure that this common European interest can be realized with the neighbors. The Western Balkans has been important in geostrategic terms for Austria. We have a long history and long tradition with the Western Balkan states, and we need to strengthen what we've already heard. It's not just that we need to talk about a possible European outlook for these countries. We need to take action as soon as possible. And it requires our action as well as countries of the European Union. We need to do something for the Western Balkans. I've just visited Bosnia-Herzegovina and the Kosovo, and I did so at a time when there was great fear that the conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, this war of aggression waged by the Russian Federation against Ukraine, might have consequences also on the Balkans, because there are major areas of influence for Russia there. And that made clear how important our good cooperation is. And I would like to reinforce the gratitude I already expressed. The Berlin process has been described really positively, because there are so many good opportunities in that to have dialogue on the one hand, but also to develop concrete steps into the future for these regions. I told the Chancellor that Austria is happy to stand at Germany's side on this and maybe to act as a bridge. We have traditional interests there, and we can help that enhance and facilitate the accession process of these countries to the European Union. This time of crisis shows how important that is, because otherwise the Western Balkans would be exposed to other influence. I've mentioned the influence of the Russian Federation, but we should also not forget that of the People's Republic of China. So for geostrategic reasons, it's very important that we put our foot down, get into gear, and really offer a chance for a good future to these people. The Ukrainian war also poses major challenges, that is without question. We see the challenges in economic terms and the scale that they have. We see the joint responsibility that we bear for the region as such, but also for the whole world. Ukraine is one of the biggest importers of wheat. If they no longer import, that will have devastating consequences also when it comes to global food. Many oilseeds from Ukraine are important for India, the largest democracy in the world. I think it's important that we as Europeans learn to look beyond the confines of our own continent. We need allies in the world, in every sense of the word. We have seen that India has adopted neutrality when it came to judging the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And that makes clear how important it is that we as the European Union really look beyond our own borders and see how important it is to have allies for our European policy all over the world. And something which is hitting us all is the suffering of the people in Ukraine. I've got somebody in my cabinet whose grandmother is in need of care, and she lives in Kiev. So you can imagine what it means also for the relatives, vulnerable groups in particular, and people requiring care and health, posing a health risk are not people who can go to an air raid shelter. The suffering of these people is unbearable from a European angle too. And it is also our obligation as neighbours to help the people. We need to help those countries immediately affected by the refugee movements. On the other hand, we see that more than 38,000 Ukrainians have already reached Austria. Women and children who can be and need to be integrated quickly. They need a basis for their own living. The children need to go to school, and we've heard already that it's very important to relieve the burden on the countries who are under a particular burden because they're immediate neighbours of Ukraine, and the Republic of Moldova was mentioned. And Moldova is a country which is also suffering from the energy monopoly position that the Russian Federation has, and they are suffering dramatically high prices of energy they pay, unlike the area of Transnistria, which the Russian Federation is occupying. And from Austria, we've managed to build a sort of airlines with Austrian Airlines, an airlift. And we are getting the people away from Moldova into Austria. And what we see is so impressive, and I can only say that also when speaking to the Chancellor of Germany. It's wonderful to see that here in Germany, that in Austria, the people are so willing to help, that there is a true and good European spirit. And at the end, dear Olaf, thank you very much for your commitment, particularly also the commitment at the European level. Austria is a country which is neutral in military terms, but we show solidarity within the European Union, solidarity within international institutions, EU, OECD, United Nations. And I strongly welcome your clear commitment to a distinct security policy that the European Union needs, that we stand with each other, that we help each other. That will be a strong momentum for the European discussion. So a big thank you for your and our cooperation. Hello. I would like to ask a question to both the chancellors. Something which unites your countries is the fact that you both oppose an energy embargo against Russia. Now we're seeing more and more voices being raised that in economic terms an embargo would be acceptable and morally a must. Would you reconsider your attitude? Should the war in Ukraine escalate further? Then I will start, because it was Austrian radio television that asked the question. For Austria, the situation is clear. We are dependent on the Russian Federation when it comes to energy, gas. We have otherwise a good energy mix. 75% of energy generated in Austria comes from renewables, but 25% that is gas, and of that 25%, 80% are Russian gas. But it's different in other countries. Hungary, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, many countries, including Germany, are also affected. Sanctions can only make sense when they really hit who they are intended to hit, instead of weakening those who impose the sanctions. And the sanctions of the European Union have a devastating effect already, and they have hit the Russian Federation very strongly. And they have caused surprise on the part of President Putin, because he never expected the EU of 27 to act united, with closed ranks, and even accept economic losses. That the EU would do this. And Austria is affected as well. But I've always said the pain that the Austrian economy is suffering because of the sanctions levied against the Russian Federation are nothing compared to what the Ukrainians have to suffer now. So it's a clear commitment to sanctions, but sanctions when they make sense, when they're right. Our objective is also something which is a big loss, or going to be, for Russia in the future, because we want to make sure that all of us get independent of fossil fuels even faster than before. We mentioned that in our joint statement earlier. But even beyond that, we want to be more diversified. In other words, we want to get other suppliers into the market. Can we do that immediately? No. Can we do it tomorrow? No. Can we do it the day after tomorrow? Maybe. But even then, it is a process which we have to be honest and clear about. I think it doesn't make sense to try to give people the wrong idea, making false promises that won't be delivered. If you ask me, it's a dreadful feeling to be dependent on Russian gas as we are now. Yes, it is. But emotions must not be dominant when, and I speak particularly as the Chancellor of Austria, it is my job to make sure there is energy supply, that the economy is working, that the gas that we get from Austria is not just used for private households, it's also used for industry. So we're talking jobs. We're talking ways of keeping our prosperity, and that also is my job. And we have to balance, on the one hand, clear sanctions, very painful for the Russian Federation, being quite clear about the fact that we want to liberate ourselves from this dependence on Russian gas in the long run. We managed to do that. We will do so together within Europe. But now the situation is such that we live with this situation, to have sanctions as tough as we can make them, but without weakening ourselves, so that we cannot continue with them. There isn't really much I could say to add to this. We both agree on how we assess this matter. It is right that we have prepared tough sanctions, Unlike what we did in the past, we actually prepared that long before the war started. Together with the US government and the European Union, we exchanged views, made suggestions, and gradually made sure that we managed to be able to take these sort of bundles of sanctions, which we did start to levy after the war started, one after the other. They are very effective. They're the most far-reaching sanctions ever levied against a country of that size. And they are hitting the development options and the economic opportunities of Russia in a dramatic way. And for many of the decisions we made, they haven't got a way of evade that. They haven't got other sources, resources. They can't recover elsewhere and get what they can't get from us anymore. This is a sign showing that we've done a good job. What we're doing now is to prepare all we can so that they don't avoid what we're doing through deals and try to escape from the sanction regime, and we will continue doing that day after day. As far as energy imports and other imports are concerned, our decisions didn't a priori comprise energy, but of course we still want to reduce our energy dependence. That is not something which you can do and will do for a day or two. That will be for the longer run. In Germany, I mean, we have companies and the government working on it. We hope that in the course of the year we'll manage to make sure that our dependence of coal and oil imports can be abolished. And as far as gas is concerned, it will take a little longer because you also need transport capacity for whatever you do. Either we're talking trucks or trains that can carry the imports, and then you need transports, harbour and port facilities that are suitable, or you need pipelines. We are working hard to create new types of infrastructure so that LNG, liquid natural gas, can be carried to Germany and be pumped into the German-European network, starting from the port facilities in the European and North European coasts. And that's a lot of effort for us and other European countries. But of course, the message then is one of lasting impact for the Russian president. One of the basic tenets of the Russian economy will disappear, and that is what he is responsible for. That has a lot to do with it as well. Another question?
Chancellor
Scholz, yesterday you spoke to Mr. Putin on the phone and you expressed skepticism when you heard that the Russians would agree to accepting euro and not just ruble payments for gas deliveries. You required confirmation in writing. According to breaking news, Mr. Putin apparently said ruble payments will be required from tomorrow. Could you tell me what you fear and what you're doing, and whether all you've said just now isn't really meaningless regarding a possible embargo? And could you please tell me what will happen when Vladimir Klitschko visits Germany? And to you, Chancellor Nehammer, the Austrian neutrality, which is surrounded by friendly nations, can this really be a role model for Ukraine, where it was a neighbour which attacked the country, or don't you think there should be very different security guarantees for a country like Ukraine, very different from what you in Austria can imagine? My answer is a very brief one. We looked at the contracts about the gas and other deliveries. These contracts state payments can be made in euros, sometimes in dollars, but as a rule they can be paid in euros. And in my discussion with the Russian president, I made clear that this is how it will continue. What his ideas are, how this will be done, that is what we will have to study now. But certainly for the companies concerned, they want to pay, can pay and will pay in euros. And the visit of Vladimir...
I'm now joined by Michaela Küfner, DW's chief political editor. So, Michaela, the last bit of the press conference that we just saw, that was probably the most important part, wasn't it? That they say they want to pay in euros or dollars. The EU says, Scholz says, but Putin in the meantime has clarified he will only accept rubles.
Yes, and actually the confusion still continues to a certain degree, because what is not quite clear is whether Vladimir Putin expects payment directly in ruble, also by European gas customers, or whether the requirement would be for clients to open an account with the Gazprom bank, which is the bank of the Russian energy provider. And that is still up in the open, and quite clearly the German Chancellor here caught slightly not fully briefed, and also not having much faith in what he hears from Vladimir Putin, because less than 24 hours ago he was on the phone with the Russian president, and the Russian president guaranteed that there would essentially be, as it said in the German readout, no change to European customers. So business as usual. Well, one thing is for sure, this is anything but business as usual, and this may well go down to the wire on Friday with the European Union customers asking themselves whether that gas will continue to go through those pipelines at the normal pressure or not. So a certain amount of clarification. Clearly, Vladimir Putin announcing that there would be a change, that clients would have to pay into a Gazprom account and then it would be transferred into ruble there, but no clarity what that essentially means, because G7 states and Germany has a G7 presidency, said they would fulfill the contracts, and the contract doesn't say anything about mandatory bank accounts. So it's a lot of intense diplomatic debate expected throughout the course of these next 24 hours.
So the oil and gas really on top of the agenda there, even though they were talking about the refugee movements as well. What other sanctions? I mean, they said they will implement the sanctions in unity, but they were not talking about fresh sanctions, are they?
The two chancellors of Austria and Germany weren't talking about them, but they weren't ruling them out. Only half an hour before this press conference, we saw Germany's Energy and Trade Minister, Robert Habeck, talk to his French counterpart, Le Drian, and they would not rule out fresh sanctions. Robert Habeck said that in the future there could well be more sanctions, that those two ministers had actually discussed what that could potentially mean, but that they would not make that public. So this is a continuation of a standoff that could well go into a tit-for-tat mode if we were to see a cut of gas supplies to Europe, specifically to those countries who are so highly dependent, as Germany and Austria are. Austria gets 80% of its gas from Russia. Germany now says that it's already gone down from more than 50% to 40% from Russia. But these are significant chunks that would immediately also hit the economy. And depending on which expert you ask, that could cost thousands of jobs.
Michaela Kühnau, Chief Political Editor. We have to leave it here for the moment, because we are coming to the end of this programme, and more news, of course, at the top of the hour with Phil Gale, and more analysis of all this as well with Michaela, and from both of us here in the studio. Thanks for watching.